When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.B Cooper. But today, after hijacking a Northwest Airlines jet, ransoming the passengers in Seattle, then making a getaway by parachute somewhere between there and Reno, Nevada, the description on one wire service, master criminal. Bill Curtis reports.
On November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a man walked into Portland International Airport and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle for $20. He gave the name Dan Cooper, boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, and took seat 18E on the rear left side of the aircraft. Wearing a dark suit, a white shirt, and a black tie, the man looked like a businessman. He carried a black briefcase. He ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, and waited quietly as the Boeing 727 taxied for takeoff. Within an hour, the world would know his name, or rather, a version of it, and he would become the only person in U.S. history to successfully hijack an airplane, parachute away with a $200,000 ransom, and disappear without a trace. This is the story of D.B Cooper, a legend born from mystery, a crime that challenged the FBI for over 45 years, and a case that remains one of the greatest unsolved heists in American history. Flight 305 departed Portland at 2:50 p.m., bound for Seattle. The flight was short, just 30 minutes, and the atmosphere on board was routine. Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner shortly after takeoff. She initially ignored it, thinking he was just giving her his phone number. But Cooper leaned in and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Startled, Schaffner read the note. It stated that Cooper had a bomb in his briefcase and wanted her to sit beside him. When she did, he cracked open the case, revealing red sticks wired to a battery. Whether it was real or a convincing fake remains unknown, but Schaffner was convinced it was real. Cooper then dictated his demands: $200,000 in negotiable bills, 4 parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve, and a fuel truck on standby in Seattle. He told her to deliver this message to the captain, and warned that if anyone tried to interfere, he would detonate the bomb. The captain radioed Seattle-Tacoma Airport. The airline's executives and FBI agents quickly assembled on the ground. Cooper's demands were met, not out of compliance, but to keep passengers safe. He showed no signs of panic. In fact, crew members described him as calm, even courteous, tipping the flight attendants and staying composed throughout. For nearly 2 hours, the plane circled Puget Sound as authorities scrambled to assemble the cash and equipment. Cooper remained quiet, sipping his drink and occasionally making small talk. At 5:39 p.m., the plane landed in Seattle. The passengers were allowed to deplane. Cooper had kept his word. Everyone was unharmed. But the most daring part of the plan was yet to come. After Cooper allowed the passengers and 2 flight attendants to deplane in Seattle, the FBI began gathering information from them, interviewing those who had been in close proximity to him. Meanwhile, Cooper remained on board with a reduced flight crew as he prepared for the second, more mysterious leg of his escape plan. Cooper was described as being in his mid-40s, around 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a medium build. He wore a white shirt, dark suit, black tie, and a mother-of-pearl tie clip. He had olive or tan skin and sported dark sunglasses during most of the hijacking. He spoke politely and intelligently, using aviation terminology. He seemed calm, collected, and in control at all times, never raising his voice or showing signs of agitation. His demeanor baffled the crew. This was not the behavior of a desperate criminal. He drank bourbon and smoked Raleigh cigarettes throughout the hijacking. At no point did he seem rushed. In fact, he was described as methodical, as if every step had been rehearsed. The name Dan Cooper was the alias he used to buy his ticket, but due to a reporter's mistake during the early coverage of the story, he became widely known as D.B Cooper. That name stuck. What's most mysterious about Cooper isn't just how he vanished, but how thoroughly he masked his identity. Despite leaving behind fingerprints, a tie, and a composite sketch, no match was ever made. This wasn't just a well-executed crime. It was a disappearing act, pulled off by someone who seemed to know exactly how to leave no trail. Once on the ground in Seattle, Cooper received the items he had demanded. The FBI delivered the $200,000 in $20 bills, a total of 10,000 notes. Each bill was photographed and recorded. The serial numbers were widely distributed in hopes they might be tracked later. He also received 4 parachutes, 2 main parachutes and 2 reserve chutes. Curiously, one of the reserve chutes was a dummy, used only for classroom training and clearly marked as non-functional. Yet Cooper took it anyway, possibly to reinforce his deception or as part of a calculated bluff. With the passengers gone and cash in hand, Cooper outlined his final instructions. Fly south toward Mexico City, at a low altitude of 10,000 feet, at a speed of no more than 200 knots. He also requested the plane's flaps be set at 15 degrees and the landing gear remain deployed, specifications that seemed oddly technical for a civilian. He refused military parachutes, opting for civilian sport parachutes instead, which reinforced suspicions he had experience in skydiving.
With the full ransom collected from Seattle banks and 4 parachutes aboard, the plane headed for Reno. It took 3.5 hours, slow for a jet, but the hijacker had given detailed flight instructions. The rear stairwell was open all the way. It arrived at Reno in shreds. The crew, here being debriefed by the FBI, was told to fly low over Oregon's flatlands with the flaps down. The speed dropped to 200 miles per hour. Somewhere, the hijacker parachuted away with the money. The crew had little to say.
We gave the information to the authorities, and we just don't want to discuss it any further.
Have you been told by the FBI not to discuss?
No, they handle their investigation, and my company would rather have it released through them.
Tina, were you with the rest of the crew during the flight after you left the ground the last time?
Yes, I went up to the cockpit.
None of you were within sight of the hijacker, right?
Right. We already talked about it, and the captain,
At 7:40 p.m., the jet lifted off once more. About 45 minutes into the flight, while over the remote forests near Ariel, Washington, the crew noticed a sudden change in cabin pressure. Around 8:13 p.m., the rear air stair had deployed, and Cooper was gone.
How did you surmise that he was not on the plane when he landed in Reno?
Well, a search was made of the plane immediately after landing.
As we understood it, he could have gotten off as the plane taxied before it came up here. How did the crew know he wasn't on when it touched ground?
The crew couldn't know that, but we had the airport covered.
Are the authorities now searching for them?
After the sudden cabin pressure change at 8:13 p.m., and with no further contact from Cooper, the pilots suspected he had jumped. Instead of continuing to Mexico as originally instructed, the crew coordinated with authorities and diverted to Reno, where the aircraft landed safely. FBI agents boarded, and Cooper was officially gone. He had jumped out of the back of a Boeing 727, wearing a business suit and loafers, carrying a parachute and a sack of $200,000, into stormy night skies, freezing rain, and total darkness. No one saw him jump. No one knows exactly where he landed. He had vanished, midair, and into history.
Snow covers the mountains in Northern California and Nevada, a hostile terrain for any parachute drop, especially at night. Police believe he left the 727 in the flatlands of Oregon or Washington, but they are still looking in 4 states, even around the airport. Authorities began their search here, thinking the hijacker may have jumped off at the end of the runway as the plane touched down. But the problem is more complex. A daring parachute escape from a flying 727 somewhere between Reno and Seattle, Washington.
Within hours of the hijacking, the FBI launched one of the most extensive investigations in U.S. history, codenamed NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. Investigators interviewed the flight crew and passengers, combed the aircraft for physical evidence, and analyzed every aspect of the hijacking. They recovered Cooper's black clip-on tie, cigarette butts, and a few fingerprints. But none of the prints matched known records, and the cigarette butts were eventually lost. Search efforts focused on the area where Cooper was believed to have jumped, dense, rugged terrain in southwest Washington near the Lewis River. Helicopters, airplanes, and ground teams combed the forests, rivers, and wilderness. Nothing was found. No parachute, no body, no money. The FBI distributed the serial numbers from the ransom cash to banks, casinos, and retail establishments across the country. Thousands of leads poured in. More than 800 suspects were investigated, from ex-military men to skydiving enthusiasts and criminals with aviation knowledge. Despite years of effort, the FBI couldn't find him. He had seemingly vanished without a trace. For years, the investigation yielded little until 1980. That year, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram found 3 bundles of decaying $20 bills buried along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. The cash totaled $5,800, and all matched the serial numbers from Cooper's ransom.
The break in the 9-year-old investigation came Sunday when Dwayne and Patricia Ingram's 8-year-old son overturned some sand while walking the shoreline of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. The public learned in an FBI news conference Tuesday, little Brian Ingram unearthed several packets of deteriorated $20 bills, and the FBI confirmed it. It was indeed several thousand of the $200,000 that bailed out with D.B. Cooper on the eve of Thanksgiving back in 1971.
Well, we were going to make a campfire, and we found it. It was partially on top of the ground, you know. It was just beneath the sand.
Who found it?
Well, my son and I found it together. I was getting ready to drop the wood, and he cleared out the spot and rolled the money over on top of the sand.
FBI agents scoured the area of the Ingrams' find. At one point, a geologist was called in to determine whether money might be buried below the surface level in dredge material deposited on the beach in 1974. On Wednesday, that geologist confirmed the money washed ashore. That meant there could be deposits of money anywhere along a 100-mile stretch of beach.
Searching in the sand on a deserted Columbia beach, finding bits of money along the high water mark. That's what's changed the whole myth of a man named Dan Cooper. People thought he landed on the west side of the range, but his money was found to be on the east side. That's how it drifted downriver. And now that's what's changing the whole search and the whole story of D.B. Cooper.
The discovery sparked renewed interest in the case, but it raised more questions than answers. Why was only a small portion of the money found? Why was it so far from the assumed drop zone? In later years, Cooper's tie was re-examined using advanced technology. Scientists found rare earth metals and titanium particles on the fabric, suggesting Cooper may have worked in a metal fabrication plant or a technical aerospace facility. Still, no match was found. Occasional reports surfaced about found parachutes, bodies, or gear, but nothing conclusively tied to the case. No large amount of the money ever entered circulation. The trail grew colder and colder.
Richard McCoy, a BYU student and Utah National Guard pilot, did the very same thing as D.B. Cooper 6 months later. McCoy made improvements like not losing the money, but then again, he got caught, and D.B. Cooper is still out there. Or is he? In 1972, Richard McCoy becomes a hunted man after parachuting out of the plane over the skies of Utah County. Hours earlier, he hijacks a plane going to Los Angeles. He demands $500,000. The plane lands in San Francisco. He gets the money and forces the pilot to fly to Mexico. But approaching Utah, he parachutes out of the plane and lands in a remote field near Springfield. That same night, he asked Pete Zimmerman, who was 16 years old at the time, for a ride.
He said, you know, I really need a ride bad. I mean, would you consider, he says, it's right on the south side of Provo. It's not very far at all. You know, I could really use some help.
He takes the stranger to his home in Provo, but Zimmerman never forgets his face. Then a McCoy family member and a close friend contact authorities after learning of the hijacking. They tell authorities McCoy once boasted of hijacking a plane and is nowhere to be found that day. Zimmerman also goes to police after reading the headlines the next day. The FBI execute a search warrant at the home, finding parachutes, a typewriter, and nearly $500,000 in cash, and McCoy is under arrest.
Over the decades, several suspects emerged as possible candidates for D.B. Cooper. One of the earliest and most notable was Richard Floyd McCoy, a Vietnam veteran who hijacked a plane using a nearly identical method 5 months later. He parachuted out with $500,000, but was caught days later. He escaped prison in 1974 and was later killed in a shootout. While many believed McCoy was Cooper, the FBI ruled him out based on physical differences and evidence.
Yesterday, the FBI announced it is no longer actively investigating the case. Today, some independent investigators are claiming they may have solved the mystery. Here is the composite drawing of the hijacker. Could this be the same man? Producer Tom Colbert heads up a team of investigators, many former law enforcement officers and FBI agents who spent the past few years trying to solve the mystery. They are saying the evidence they have gathered points to this man, identified as Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam vet who's a former pilot and paratrooper, as the real D.B. Cooper.
It is a smorgasbord of evidence.
I spoke to Robert Rackstraw on the phone today. He said the conclusions of these independent investigators have so many loopholes. In his words, you could drive a truck through them. When I asked him, "Are you the hijacker we've come to know as D.B. Cooper?" he responded, "Do your own diligence." And then he hung up the phone.
Are you the person who boarded a flight on November 24th, 1971?
When Rackstraw was confronted on camera by Colbert's investigators, he had this to say.
Did you board that Northwest flight and hijack it for $200,000?
I've never been on a Northwest flight.
Colbert is asking the FBI to examine the evidence his team has collected.
If they look at that evidence and say it's not good, fine.
In the meantime, the true identity of D.B. Cooper remains a mystery.
Another prominent suspect was Robert Rackstraw, a former Army paratrooper with a history of fraud and deception. In the 2010s, investigative journalists linked him to Cooper through circumstantial evidence, including matching military terminology and forged identities. Yet the FBI never confirmed a definitive link.
There have been a lot of people suspected of being Skyjacker D.B. Cooper, even the Portland Pickles mascot at one point. Eric Eulis has been searching for the real D.B. Cooper for years. He even has a TV show about it. But Eulis says his attention is focused now on a new suspect. The trail started with a necktie found on the plane Cooper hijacked. It was tested with something called sticky stubs, which pulled off some unique metal particles.
Obviously had 3 of these particles on his tie, and it does appear that there is no place in the world that he could have picked up these 3 particles outside of the company where these particles were experimented with.
So Eulis tracked down the only research lab in the country that worked with the same titanium found on the Cooper tie. He found a man named Vince Peterson had worked there.
The titanium research lab consisted of about 8 men. That's it, a very small universe of engineers that worked in the titanium research lab. And these men in the research lab, by the way, did wear ties.
And Vince Peterson matched the description of D.B. Cooper. Same height, same weight.
He was 52 years of age on November 24, 1971. Again, the witnesses described D.B. Cooper as generally in mid-40s to about 50 years of age, focusing on the primary witnesses, which were the flight attendants.
A newer name has emerged in recent years: Vince Peterson. He was a titanium research engineer who worked for Remcrew Titanium, a company that supplied rare metals to Boeing in the 1960s. Forensic tests on Cooper's tie revealed traces of rare earth metals and titanium, strongly suggesting the hijacker had exposure to an environment like Peterson's workplace. Eric Eulis, a longtime D.B. Cooper researcher, has pointed to Peterson as a compelling suspect due to his physical resemblance, access to Boeing aircraft details, and presence in the Seattle area around the time of the hijacking. Although the FBI never officially named him, Peterson remains one of the most recent and credible leads in the case. None of the suspects were ever officially charged. Each lead eventually unraveled, either from lack of evidence or contradictory facts.
We don't know if he lives or if he dies. That adds to the mystery. It's like having a novel without a final chapter. We want to know how it turns out.
The two most common theories are that D.B. Cooper either died during the jump or escaped and disappeared. Skeptics argue that jumping into the dark, rainy wilderness at night, wearing a suit and loafers, was a death sentence. The terrain was unforgiving, and Cooper had no clear landing spot. If he survived the jump, he would have needed to travel undetected through miles of forest. But supporters of the escape theory point to the planning. Cooper chose the Boeing 727, one of the only commercial planes with a rear air stair. He asked for civilian parachutes. He knew the flight altitude, speed, and where to jump. All of this suggests military or skydiving experience. And then there's the money. If Cooper died, where is the rest of the cash? Only $5,800 has ever been found. The remaining $194,200 remains missing and never entered circulation. If he lived, Cooper may have assumed a new identity and started over, taking the secret to his grave. D.B. Cooper became a modern-day outlaw, a mysterious figure who captured the imagination of America. He's been referenced in films, television shows, books, comics, and even music. The case inspired the 1981 movie The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, multiple documentaries, and even appearances in series like Prison Break and Loki. Entire communities of amateur sleuths have dedicated their lives to solving the mystery. Annual events like CooperCon gather fans and theorists from around the world to debate the case. Souvenirs, books, and media continue to immortalize him. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the case. With no new evidence and diminishing leads, they decided to focus their resources elsewhere. But D.B. Cooper had already achieved something more elusive than freedom. He became a legend. The story of D.B. Cooper is more than just an unsolved crime. It's a cultural phenomenon, a mystery that has endured for over 50 years, refusing to be solved. He walked onto a plane a nobody and vanished into legend. No body, no real name, no clear ending. Whether he perished in the wilderness or lived out his life in secret, one thing is certain. D.B. Cooper executed one of the boldest escapes in history and left behind a mystery that still haunts investigators, historians, and curious minds around the world. Perhaps we'll never know what really happened on that stormy night in 1971. But maybe that's exactly how he planned it. What do you think happened to D.B. Cooper? Did he survive the jump? Was he a war veteran, a rogue agent, or just a man who wanted to disappear? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more unsolved mysteries, infamous crimes, and true crime storytelling.